Okay, and I'm also going to put you all on mute if that's all right, just so it stops any background noise. Um, Mute all. There you go. If you would like to speak, I'm really happy with that. Just unmute and or raise your hand. I think there is a thing if you understand Zoom, there is a raise a hand thing, but otherwise just shout out. The other function that's going to be quite useful is a chat box. That should be at the bottom of your screen. And as you're going along, if you've got a comment or a question, you can pop that in the chat box, and I will gather those things together towards the end because I've left some time at the end for questions. So, if something comes to mind, just type it into the chat box and you don't forget if you would like to do that or jot it down beside you and we'll get to those at the end. So that's no problem. I don't need to do any other housekeeping because you all know where your toilets are. I'm not going to do a fire alarm and yeah, we're all those things. So I think we should be okay with that. I am going to share a PowerPoint again because it's just another tool to help us cue into the topic. It's a visual tool, helps us just focus in. And I'm not doing death by PowerPoint because I don't agree with that either, but it just helps us move the story along tonight. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Lynn McCann. I'm based in Lancashire, as I said, mid Lancashire, just south of Preston. I lived in Lancashire all my life, but I put my posh voice on for you tonight just in case there's any Lancashire words that come up. And I have been sort of involved in the autism, ADHD, and neurodivergence world for over 20 years, mainly through education, but also through churches. And also for 12 years, I helped run a group for adults with learning disabilities at my church. And I'm involved in working with adults with learning disabilities at the Keswick Convention and basically sticking my nose in and agitating anybody and everybody about accessibility in church, and I've been doing that for a long time. Yeah, it's my favourite subject. I have also been on a journey myself. So 5 years ago, nearly, I received my own ADHD diagnosis, and I have what we are calling in our family a neurospicy family. And my eldest daughter is 30 years old now, married, and is autistic ADHD. And she also gives me lots of insights that are really interesting. And, for our faith as well, and working that out as we go along. So, we're bringing that together, but I've had some lovely conversations with Pete in preparation for this, and hopefully this will help you all work together. I just love this. Just the fact that you're all coming together to understand Pete and work with him, and it's just a beautiful thing. So thank you everybody for coming. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So, one of the things that I do as my day job is I'm a specialist teacher, and that photograph in the middle is the team of specialist teachers that are in my company, which are all brilliant, amazing people. Many of them are Christians as too, so it's great. We do a lot of praying around the work that we do. I'm a administrator for the Additional Needs Alliance, which primarily is a Facebook page which was put together by Kay Morgan Gurr, who is a National Disability Advisor, and Mark Arnold from Urban Saints, who are really good friends of mine. It's a really lovely, safe Facebook community that support one another around church and inclusion and supporting families. I'm also, and I think this is how Pete and I connected through the roof. I'm a roof breaker at my church and have been involved with that charity as well as Count Everyone In for many, many years. And as I said, I'm currently doing quite a lot of little projects with the Blackburn Diocese, which is my diocese. And again, just because I've been agitating them for so many years, they now have got, oh, yeah, Lynn, we should ask her. And I get involved in all sorts of things. It's really that we're having a centenary this year, and we're having a big day out in Blackpool. I'm sure you've heard of Blackpool, and I've been asked to set up a sensory safe tent and space in that big day out thing. So things like that just give me joy. And my own ministry is called Included by Grace. It's just a small thing that's been ticking along in the last few years. And then I'm hoping to grow that over the next few years. So I know, sorry, I didn't want to give you my whole CV, but just to show you that, I kind of, I've got a lot of experience to draw on as we talk tonight. So, getting talking to Pete and gathering together what I was going to do. I've only got this short amount of time, and it's a topic I could talk on for 6 days. So you're lucky you've only, you've capped that a little bit. But basically, the aim for this session is to help you as a church around Pete work well together and really get the most out of your vicar and you as a team and be able to help see how that knowledge and experience can also reach out into your community, which again is what you're all about. So yes, helping you understand your vicar, strengthening you as a body. And it's not about fixing anything or anybody. It's about learning how you support one another and how you work together well. And this might need some challenges, it might need some changes, it might need something different, but it's all about getting the best out of you as a team. And of course, a really key kind of foundation of this in the Bible is 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul talks about we are one body and many parts. And I think we're always working that out in any church. How are all the different parts getting to know each other, getting to understand one another? I always think I'm a little finger or a little toe, but maybe one day, I'm a pointy finger or or something else or a knee. And it's hard to know, isn't it, where we all stand in that. But it's a developmental part of being a community that we learn how to function as that body. And when it works well and all the parts are there, and that's what 1 Corinthians is about, when we're all there together, then actually we are the best that we can be as Christ's body. So the caveat is that we're not here to learn everything about ADHD. As I say, I'd probably go on for about 6 days with that. But we're here to understand the person that God has called, and that is framing through the lens of having ADHD. So just going back to our Bible, really, there's so many wonderful parts of God's word that really encourages us as Christians to come together and understand one another. And, those all of those is about Christ being the head and the Holy Spirit being our enabler. So when we don't understand something, He is there to help us understand so that we can, no matter what our background, no matter what our neurology, no matter what our physical situation, we are all there able to be part of that body equally. And each of you is a part of it, and each of you is very valuable. So it's really good to kind of embed what we're doing within this. And it is such a beautiful picture of the church and your individual church and obviously the church as a whole. Okay. So there's a few words that have changed language. In the 20 years I've been in this kind of field, the language has developed a lot. So I first started as an autism specialist teacher with some children who had quite severe learning difficulties. And I was very curious about how the gospel could be shared with people who had no verbal language, who seemed to find life very difficult and challenging. And then it was called autism spectrum disorder, this horrible word, the D words, disorder. And that became my prayer, and that's how I sort of set off on this ministry. However, over the years, what I've really understood is that this thing called autism and this thing called ADHD and things like that are associated with it, like dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and so on, are what we call part of human neurodiversity. Now, you might have heard of biodiversity, the plant and animal kingdom, and we just take it for granted that all those animals, all those plants are different and they all need different environments to thrive. How about we're now looking at how that applies to human beings, that we are all neuro just means brain, so all our brains are different and our brains need different environments in order to thrive. My kind of frustration is that education hasn't really got there with that yet. But in church, we have such an opportunity to make our environments so welcoming and safe and available for people of all different neurodiverse kind of thinkings and brains and so on. So the majority of people, and I always question this, but this is the language that we use, fall into something called neurotypicalism or the neuro predominant neurotype. So, and the word normal is not one I usually use at all because it's actually a mathematical term. It's not about people. So, neurodiversity is the whole human population. Neurodivergence is the word that we use for autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. So brains that work and process things in different ways. And yes, that does come with some challenges, but it also comes with a lot of strengths and creativity. And through this, we're also using the social model of disability. So the medical model talks about somebody is wrong, they're broken, their brain doesn't work right, it's not normal. That comes from that medical model. But the social model of disability is about it's the environment, the reactions, the support that actually, or lack of, that disables somebody. And that's particularly useful when we are supporting people who are neurodivergent. Just to give you, I mean, statistics are no good really because they're so out of date. But if these are kind of like an average of the statistics out there, that 5 to 10% of the population have ADHD. A really big amount of people have ADHD, and there's a lot of myths on people in the media saying, "Oh, we've got an epidemic, it's all happening, and everybody's getting ADHD." The truth is, when we have just missed so many people, that it's only now that our advanced understanding of ADHD has got so far as people, the diagnosis is catching up. Have you got that, Pete? Yeah. So the one of the biggest growth in ADHD diagnosis is actually in the adult population. Again, 2 to 5% of people are autistic. And again, our language around that has changed from autistic spectrum disorder to being autistic. 10% have dyslexia, 10% have dyspraxia, 5% dyscalculia, 22% anxiety conditions. But the interesting thing about this as well is that even in the ADHD community, 60% of those would have a co-occurring condition. So it's very common to have ADHD and autism. It's very common to have ADHD, dyspraxia, and so on, or dyslexia. And things like Tourette's and other conditions are involved in this as well. So it's very hard to actually think that we can pigeonhole anybody because we can't. And on top of this is that there are many people who are undiagnosed. Maybe they don't want to go for diagnosis, they're not sure, especially as adults, whether that would be useful. But there's also an awful lot of people on waiting lists because, again, we've not kept up with the diagnosing as the amount of people who are realizing that they may need that assessment. So the visual there with all those coloured dots is representing the difference we have in this spectrum, and that's why it's called a spectrum. So each person who's autistic or has ADHD or is dyslexic is a different person. They have lots of other things in their lives, their history, their personality, their skills, their talents. And the joy of my job and my life is meeting each person and getting to know them as an individual. We often say people have something like a spiky profile, and that means there are areas of strengths and there are areas of challenges or barriers or difficulties as well. And it's typical development is seen sort of on a straight line. I don't know many people who kind of follow that in their life, but spiky profile is more up and down. And both of those things can be happening. You can have talent and creativity and difficulty in the same sort of position. Now, I want to sort of tackle some myths here. So, one of the myths that I often hear is, somebody who has a child or a grandchild who is autistic or ADHD, and they meet an adult and they say, well, you're not like my child, or you're not nonverbal. And it says, well, how can you all both be autistic or ADHD? And that is the kind of the widening of our understanding that has happened in the last 10 years or so, is that yes, you can be ADHD, autistic, and have other learning needs as well. But you can also have lots of academic ability and be bright and capable in so many ways. But it is still autistic or ADHD, because of the diagnostic criteria covers all that range of different abilities. So it's really important that we never say to somebody, oh, you can't be autistic, or please don't say that we're all a bit ADHD, because actually what we all are is human, and we do have commonalities. So yes, we might forget things occasionally, but for somebody who's ADHD, they struggle with object permanence. It's like out of sight, out of mind. So it's not just a bit of forgetfulness, it's actually real struggle every day to remember the things that they need. And so where you can have commonalities, you can have areas of human connection. For somebody who has ADHD, those things are more severe and more challenging than if you haven't got those challenges you could have probably even imagine. So, the whole sort of spectrum is, for me, in my job and my life and meeting all these different people, it's just amazing how many wonderful, amazing people I meet who are neurodivergent. And one of the biggest sort of challenges for people is being misunderstood, often being judged, and that's within church and outside of church. And a lot of that is through people believing myths, not having up-to-date information, and probably some kind of past experiences that they haven't really understood as well. So that's what this sort of training is about. It's to help us all move into that area of, yes, we get it, and therefore we can work forward from that. So welcome. I'm just going to pause there and say welcome to the two new people who've joined us. My name's Lynn, and you can see Pete there, and we've just started really. And it is being recorded, so you will get to catch up on anything you've missed, so don't worry about that. Okay. So the whole aspects of autism, ADHD, and these other labels that people get, we might ask, are labels helpful? Again, myself, I went through that kind of dilemma of, should I get diagnosed or not, or should I have the assessment? But I can only say having that assessment has been such a relief. Understand many years of misunderstanding myself and blaming myself for things, and actually having a clearer lens has been really illuminating. And diagnosis labels, as long as we don't judge somebody by a label, but use it as a lens to understand them, that's the way forward. Because, as I said, every person will be different. So it's an interesting development in human understanding, I think. It's being contributed to by neuroscience and more, and obviously social media, where because people are now sharing more information about it, there's been more research. And I know, Pete, this doesn't cover you, but I want to talk about girls and women as well who have been missed for many years. And therefore, and also because some men have as well, because of something we now call masking. And that's where somebody has, again, put on a mask acted and copied and tried to fit in with everybody else. But that has a huge, huge toll on people in their mental health and exhaustion because it is exhausting. And so, with people trying to kind of find out who they are within that, we have this huge awareness and more diagnosis. It's nothing more than that, really. Honestly, it's not paracetamol. It's not something in the water. It is just awareness as well. The other thing to say about neurodivergent conditions, most of them are genetic, and that's again the neuroscience and geneticists have kind of mostly come to the conclusion that it is genetically passed on. There's not one gene; it's a whole host of things. So again, there are sometimes environmental triggers, but it's mostly genetic. So what we conclude from that is that we've got more neurodivergent people because neurodivergent people are having babies. And it kind of comes down to that. And when I talked to my 80-odd-year-old father about my diagnosis of ADHD, he said, "Well, you're just like me, aren't you?" And, that kind of sorted that one out. So that's kind of what I'm saying is kind of resetting what you've heard, what you might have read, and really challenging some of the media narrative around having ADHD and these other. I'm going to sort of focus in on ADHD, but I will mention the others again as co-concurring things. So it's not just one expression that you're going to see. If you have three, four, five people who have that ADHD diagnosis, it's going to have an impact on their age. That's going to have an impact on it because as they grow and they develop, they get different strategies and different changes. Puberty has a lot of challenges, but also changes through neurodivergence because of the brain development. And again, if their gender will make a difference because hormones and ADHD, there's a big connection as well. But also their life experiences, if they've had any trauma, any other past experience, and actually faith. Faith as well can have an impact on the way somebody manages and works with their ADHD, or sadly, sometimes hides it and is ashamed of it. That can happen as well within the faith settings as well. So each person's going to be different. There are also lots of different characteristics. So there are three different ways people can be diagnosed. One is predominantly inattentive. We'll come back to this. There is predominantly hyperactive and impulsive and combined. And the most common one is combined ADHD. Now, I've talked about ADHD. I haven't actually explained the letters, but we will come to those as well. And, those there's also people who do a lot, you see it a lot externally. So it might be that they are very fidgety and always on the move and seem really scatty. But there's also a lot of people, especially into adulthood, who internalize the kind of characteristics that they have of ADHD. That's what I said is masking. But also, and Pete seemed to like this word that I use called swanning, and it is literally like a swan where it seems to glide over the top of the water, but underneath the feet are going like this. Yeah, that's kind of a very common experience of many ADHDers because, again, you spend a lot of time trying to look okay on the outside and get it together, but underneath there's absolute panic, and that is really common. And many people who get that diagnosis take a long while to discover themselves. There's unlearning of what they thought about themselves beforehand, looking at their life with a new lens. I mean, I got diagnosed at the age of, oh, what was I? 50 something. I've forgotten already. About 53, I think I was. And I had to then have a look back at my whole life with that new lens, which took a couple of years at least. And I'm still thinking things through now. So, it's a journey that people are on and a lot of unpicking to do at times. Which is, part of what Pete is going through as well. And just having an understanding of that. Because as you do that, little light bulbs come on. Oh, that. And you kind of learn things about yourself all the time. And sometimes that can be in the middle of a conversation with you, that it just things. And having ADHD and that bit of impulsivity means it's hard not to share it in the moment as well. It's like, oh, yes, I need to tell you this because it's so exciting. So the most important thing is to think about don't compare anybody who has the same diagnosis. It's about getting to know them as a person, but the diagnosis understanding can help guide us in what areas we might need to be aware of. Judging people is a huge thing. Um, I can't tell you how many times people have rolled their eyes at me because I've been talking too much. This sort of activity is great because this is what you're asking me to do, so it's great. But, people notice the eye rolls, the tuts, oh, she's on again. Instead of coming alongside me and saying, shall we talk about something else, Lynn? It's my friends who know me and love me are the curious ones who say, oh, why does it get like that for you? Or can you tell me about that? Is there something that would make that easier for you? And so curiosity is a beautiful thing to come alongside somebody with ADHD. So this first little part of this training here is to look at like your neurodivergent people might not look quite what you expected. And that's because it's not on the outside that it's all going on. It's all going on the inside. It's the way brains work differently. And brains are an amazing part of God's creation. They are the computer, the center of everything that kind of works our body, reads our body, keeps us safe, helps us think, develops our faith. And all those things can be affected by having that ADHD lens. Hope you're okay. Just to say as well for the new people who've come in, if you want to make any comments or you want to ask any questions, I don't mind people interrupting me actually, but there is the chat box at the bottom. So just type things in there and there'll be some good times. I hope somebody does come up with some questions because I've left time. It's going to be dead awkward if we're all sitting here with nothing to say, isn't it? So do think of some. That'd be great. And honestly, nothing is too silly and nothing is too difficult. If it is too difficult, I go away and find out for you. So don't worry about that. I absolutely love this quote from Thomas Brown, and I use it with anybody. So I do some coaching with ADHD adults, and I've worked with a lot of young people as well. But just this first bit, ADHD seems to be a willpower failure. Anybody with ADHD will tell you they put effort into everything. They try and they try and they try. In any one, like in a meeting, if you've got somebody with ADHD, the effort they are putting in to be in that meeting and keep their attention and focus on what that's happening is absolutely huge, and it can be really exhausting. So it's not that they're not just trying, or if they just tried harder, they have been trying hard all their lives. So it's not about willpower at all. But as Thomas Brown mentions here, it's a problem with the interacting dynamics of emotion, working memory, and the chemistry of the brain. So we're going to unpick that a little bit so that you can understand where that's coming from. So here we are. So ADHD actually stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's the most rubbish name ever. And we've kind of, because we're stuck with it at the moment and people are exploring different ways, we kind of, I've changed that D's to differences. So attention differences and hyperactivity differences are a little bit better. Those other D words are awful. And for anybody to be saying you've got, deficits and disorder, it just is an awful way to speak about anybody. And it's really important to think about these differences. So the diagnostic criteria looks at attention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. But the last time that was updated was 14 years ago. And therefore, we are now starting to, I think the powers that be are starting to update the diagnostic criteria. because executive functions are a big part of the difficulties that ADHDers have. So if I just describe what's going on in this here, I've kind of flipped the diagnostic criteria into differences and more positive approach to it. Because if we're only talking about deficits, we're just missing the point of a person altogether. So attention is often thought to be a person who has ADHD doesn't have any attention. And that again is just wrong. What they have is what we call variable attention. So some people have said it's like having a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes, that the attention is constantly scanning. Some people it's like having 360-degree attention. Um, because what's happening in the brain, and this is where the neuroscience comes in, you may have heard of dopamine, but there are other neurochemicals as well that mean that the thought process across our brain from beginning to end through our synapses is dependent on these proteins and these hormones, such as dopamine, in order to start to the end of a thought process. So if you're making a plan, it's dopamine that does that. And what's really good at the end of that, if you finish something, you get a little burst of serotonin and you get some satisfaction. And that's what drives us and motivates us to do things. So in ADHD, we know now that those chemicals, and we'll stick with dopamine for now. The dopamine isn't produced as strongly as it needs to be, or it is in a typical brain. So the brain is always seeking more dopamine in order just to function. Now, the distraction is that the brain has got so used to scanning all the time for something interesting, because interest does create dopamine, that in any room, an ADHD person will be scanning all the time what's going on around them. And that's noise, visual, people. For me, for some reason, I always notice what shoes everybody's wearing. Don't know why, but it's just my thing. And that but to keep the attention on something means it has to be very interesting or take a lot of effort. So we've got variable attention because at other times, if something's really interesting to the person with ADHD, they can hyper focus, get really to be enormously productive in that hyper focus. So that variation can be different every day and very dependent on other things as well, whether you've eaten enough, whether you've slept enough. But attention is always the brain trying to get enough to be able to focus. And it can be exhausting, that. However, it can also be extremely creative. And as you say, once you're locked in, that is really good place to be and can be very, very productive. Some of the most productive people have got ADHD. There's lots of entrepreneurs and business owners who have ADHD because what they do is work out the way their attention works best and get things done. Now, connected to that is the next word that comes up here on the side should be, where's it gone? I love this. There you go, boredom. Now, boredom in ADHD is the enemy because what boredom does is not interesting, as you say. It actually shuts the brain down because there's no dopamine flowing through the brain. So it's not just that bored, it's actually the brain stopping working and the person become and either have to take a lot more effort to try and stay focused or just switches off. Which is why for the first adults who aren't particularly kind of, obviously ADHD can be quite daydreamy because the brain goes off on another story that's more interesting or seem to zone out. Now, impulsivity comes alongside this in that when the brain does see something interesting, and it is driven by that interest, that the brain can sometimes just do the thing very quickly because they've grabbed that interest and that dopamine. Impulsivity in ADHD is an interesting thing because people always talk about consequences. Why did you do that? You knew what was going to happen, and yet you couldn't stop yourself. And this having to stop yourself before you do something impulsive, very, very difficult for ADHDers. Now, in a typical person, apparently, there is a thought, then they can think about the consequence, and then the action. It works the other way around in ADHD. There's a thought, an action, and then they think about the consequence. And for many ADHDers who have tried and tried around to keep those impulses at bay, yes, it takes a lot of effort. And by adulthood, you can do a lot of that. But if you mess up and you do something impulsively and it has a bad consequence, then actually there comes a lot of shame, and it's very soul destroying, and they blame themselves a lot. So impulsivity though can have a good side to it as well. Impulsivity means that an ADHD is really good in a crisis. They can see what happens and need to do it, especially with that 360 attention, seeing what needs to be done and acting really quickly. It can also mean an awful lot of creativity and really good for problem solving and seeing things differently. So, and it can also lead to an awful lot of kindness. Again, impulsive kindness can be part of that as well. So, again, we're not just looking at the kind of negative side of this, we've got to look at the positives as well. So, attention and impulsivity are connected. And when we go to the other side, the third aspect is hyperactivity. And hyperactivity also has two aspects to it. One is physical hyperactivity, needing to move. I've got, my fidget toys here, but also what, again, the brain is trying to read the body. And if the body is not moving, it can start to shut the brain down. So again, an ADHD brain is a brain that needs movement in order to function better. Hyperactivity and movement can actually release, again, endorphins. It can release the dopamine in order for the brain to work better. So sitting still, I mean, I'm a person who got told off for fidgeting at an ADHD conference. The person next to me who told me to stop fidgeting hadn't been listening, obviously. But it's funny, isn't it? Because some of that hyperactivity is not just physical, and some people seem to be able to sit still for a while. But what happens is then there's an internal fizziness, and it's like all the muscles and joints in the body start fizzing and needing to move or do something. And the brain takes so much energy doing that, it then can lose focus on other things. But there's an also hyperactivity of the brain. And again, people describe it as having 50 tabs open on your computer, or 50, I'm old-fashioned, TV screens in front of you, and somebody else is in charge of the remote control. But just having lots of tabs and sort of ideas open in your head at any one time. And this is why a lot of ADHDers can also struggle to go to sleep or to rest, calm down, because the brain is always hyperactive, even if the body isn't. So some people struggle with sleep a lot because the brain doesn't slow down enough to get into that sleep mode and release the melatonin it needs. Other people, and I'm one of these, I'm like a Duracell bunny. I'm either on all the time or I'm asleep. There's no sort of middle ground. It's one or the other. But again, with Pete, it's understanding that he will be trying very hard to focus, trying very hard to think, but also within your body, isn't it, Pete, that it's trying to find the right level of regulation that you need. And that's where things like people fidgeting is really helpful. There's a whole explosion of fidget toys, but actually it's because in your fingers are some really sensitive receptors. And that's where your touch receptors are the most sensitive in your whole body. So in your fingertips, if you're fidgeting with something, you're actually sending some really strong messages back to your brain to help it focus. And if that's rhythmic, it also can be really calming as well. And the same with deep pressure, hugs or rolling in, sort of pressing on something on your muscles. That can be really calming for the brain as well. So it is a sensory thing, is hyperactivity, that needing to move, but at the same time needing calming things as well. And any kind of, we call it the window of tolerance. If you're in your window of tolerance where you're calm enough and alert enough, your brain can work well. But if there's any sensory regulation, that window goes down, and it means that each day can be different depending on the sensory dysregulation. That does come with pressing the right button. Emotional dysregulation, because emotions are connected to our sensory systems. We said earlier that ADHD can be an interacting with emotional dysregulation. For many ADHDers, emotions happen in the body. And when you get an emotion, you're dealing with the physical aspect of that emotion before you can cope with the cognitive side of that. And I mentioned earlier on with the impulsivity and doing things wrong when you didn't want to do it, the shame that that comes with, lots of adults, well, lots of children, but it gets worse in adulthood, I think, end up with so much shame that it actually is a physical manifestation of that very often. I don't know if you've ever, feel embarrassed and you kind of feel a bit shaky inside, you might go red. But the deep shame that can come with, I'm always getting it wrong, people are always telling me I'm not good enough or I'm talking too much, really embeds a lot of trauma inside ADHDers. And we call this, it says RSD there, it's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And there's a lot of ADHDers actually need that counselling and support around that emotional side of having ADHD. There's not enough time to go into it in great depth. Pete at some point might like to tell you about what he is going, what level that affects him. But it's not as like just taking things personally. It's actually a deep, deep kind of dread reaction to criticism, getting things wrong, making mistakes, upsetting other people, in the same way as, trying your best not to do that for people. And therefore, people pleasing can be a big part of it as well. Again, it affects different people in different ways, but it's now recognized as being part of that ADHD experience. Okay. Oh, so I thought I had another word at the side there. Interest seeking. I said that before. That's okay. So I'm going to move on to executive functions. Just looking at, oh, just looking. So just looking at the comments. Thank you for those. Okay, so ADHD differences are not something that, with support and people around you who care about you and understand you, actually can also be turned into assets. And most adults who get a diagnosis have spent a lot of time working on themselves. But I also want to say a little bit about faith as well, because one of the things I've noticed in the ADHD community is a deep understanding of God's forgiveness and grace. And that again is often a deep understanding of that. Um, and sometimes, again, difficulty in accepting that for themselves. But actually, it can often lead to a lot of real empathy and deep empathy for other people. And when preaching or just sharing about God's love and God's grace, it comes with a real heartfelt kind of message with that, with lots of ADHDers. And again, it's important to, not that nobody else can do that, but I'm just saying that's one thing I've noticed in that community. Okay, executive functions. Now, you all have these, did you know? I don't know if you've heard of them. They seem to be, again, be talked about recently. If you've got a job or you're making a cup of tea or you're having a shower, anything you do on a daily basis, you need your executive functions. They're the frontal lobe of your brain, and they're like, if you've ever watched that film, the Inside Out. It's like having your control panel. And so they're the things that enable us to do stuff like keep in mind the instructions, prioritize what you do first and what you do next, and so on. So they all enable. I'm not going to read all these out for you. You can look and you will get the visual. So one of the things I will pick out is for many people with ADHD, it's not that they don't know what to do or how to do it, it's the getting started. And procrastination can be a great thing because it's just, I don't know how to start this task. The brain just doesn't organize it. And also timekeeping or time blindness is very common. Oh, I've got ages to do that. And then suddenly there's only 5 minutes left. And that understanding of time can have a real big impact. Just to give you an example how this works. So how about making a cup of tea? It might be some or a coffee if you're a coffee drinker. Something simple that you do every single day. If we break this down into the executive functions that we would need, I'm not going to read all these out, but here's a list of all the little parts of the job to make a cup of tea or coffee. I've done tea because I'm a Lancashire lass. We drink tea up here. And it's all the decisions you have to make, as well as the organization of the task itself and what order you have to do it in order to make that task successful. And one of the things we do is we make this a routine. But if you go to a new kitchen somewhere and you're suddenly having to like root in all the cupboards for a cup of tea, for where all the mugs are, and you don't know if there's any milk, there's an awful lot more stress on doing that. Now, for somebody with ADHD, every single task of the day needs more effort to put the executive functions in place. Now, what we do, because we're clever people, we might actually group these tasks into something that's a little bit more manageable. So we might actually group them into 6 tasks here. And the first one is getting everything ready and then fill the kettle, then do the tea bag and waiting for the kettle to boil. So actually what we do as adults is we learn to put these tasks together and we make them very routine, and we need those routines in order to be able to do them without having to think through the task every single time. Another really good tip for ADHDers though is color coding. Absolutely is a really good cognitive support for lots of things. So, just putting things in colors allows the brain to switch to each part of the task a lot quicker. It's just a good kind of a thing, unless you're colorblind, of course, but color coding generally helps. So that's kind of an overview of what ADHD is. And I've gone into a little bit of detail to help you kind of think through that each day, somebody with ADHD has to have, bring their executive functions together, bring their attention together, focus on what they're doing. And if something's boring, try and find an interesting way to do it, because we know that things have to be done, whatever. Okay. This is just some research around the things around shame. I just think it's really worth putting in there. It just gets me every time I read this that by the time somebody's 12, they've heard 20,000 more negative messages. And it's not people being horrible on purpose. It's like, stop, don't do that. You're not doing that right. You pay attention. You should be with us in the room. And those things build up and build up that. So if that's by the age of 12, what about the age of 24? What about 36, 48? The amount of negative messages that are just one-off comments from lots of different people and not being able to live up to the expectations of others really has an impact on the mental health of many people with ADHD. So, it's lots of people now looking at it. It's not about behavior, what you see on the outside, it's actually about the cognitive functioning. Donna Williams, right back in 1996, talked about autism is that, people are judging it for about behavior and things of what's going on the outside, but actually we need to think about what's the experience of that person. And that's where, my this really informs the job I do as I get to know people who are autistic, ADHD. What is your life like for you? And we work from that. And again, just Dan Duncan's thing there, the problem with ADHD, it looks like something it isn't. Okay. So what we know is that there's different processing. It's not lack of care. Time blindness can impact on a day-to-day basis of being organized or struggling to be organized or just like doing what you said you would do because time can just. I like Doctor Who. I don't know if anybody else does, but he uses a phrase called timey-wimey. I was like, that's my life. It's timey-wimey. Time can be, I'm on it or I'm not. There could be communication differences because, again, focusing in on different things. They may look okay on the outside, but they're really working hard on the inside. And there is a real need for structure, but difficulty sustaining it. So it's best not to judge what we see on the outside, that, something hasn't been done or we want to do something differently. It's about thinking about why are you going in that direction? What's your internal experience of this? Are you getting overwhelmed? Or have you got a good idea that you've only told us half of it? And so on. Are you struggling to finish this job because it's suddenly you're in that middle bit where it gets a bit boring and a bit monotonous? So it's about understanding the internal experience of somebody. So, the brain processing things, and don't judge the motivation or the character. And that's a hard thing, isn't it? Oh, you're always doing that. That is just so damaging, especially because it's something an ADHD will often hear. So on a day-to-day basis, you showing up and working with somebody who has ADHD, together, you need to work out how you're communicating. And don't just leave things to chance or assume. Assumptions are killers, I think, in so many ways of communicating. So, I do this. I run a team of 10 people in my business, and all our communication channels are very clear. We've sat down together and say, how is this going to work best for us? What do we need to do? Do we need to have it on a WhatsApp? Do we need to do that? Have we got too many communication channels? But we work that out together, and it's very clear for everybody. And also know that, Pete will probably think by talking out loud of verbal processing. And therefore, it's going on that journey of discussion until you get to a good idea. And you probably get better ideas by thinking things through. I don't know if you like me, Pete. Sometimes I what I call think aloud. I might go on a walk and I'm talking and I'm praying with God, but I'm hopefully nobody's listening to me talking out loud, because the verbal processing helps the brain focus in better. Understand that time and organization can be hard, and one really good way to support that is just breaking things down into small chunks. Let's do this bit first and let's do it by then. Let's do the next bit by then. And just small chunks can make a really big, overwhelming task such more successful. And again, understand, maybe ask Pete, what is he carrying internally? What effort or masking or kind of what's going on inside his head that might be distracting him or be laying heavy on him, which then affects how much you can focus on the thing you're doing. So, and it could be as simple as, somebody came to him in the morning and they've lost somebody, and he's carrying the weight of that emotion of somebody's grief. And then that will impact quite heavily on the focus on a PCC meeting, for example. But just talking about it and understanding that, again, as I said earlier, ADHD is carry emotion quite heavy and feel it deeply, even if we don't always explain it. And therefore, just acknowledging that can be really important. And if you said something it doesn't land, just remember it's a difference, not a lack of care. How just spending a little bit of time with Pete, knowing that how much he cares about you all, and about his work and about, the gospel and the Lord and all the people that been given to care for. You can see that, can't you, in him, and you all know him better than me. So if I pick that up, it's just that if it's not landed with him, it's just you maybe need speaking in a different way or taking time to process. So, it's about interpreting somebody who might be thinking differently to you, not assuming, not judging, and just seeing things through that lens. Okay. Now, again, Pete and I had a really interesting discussion about our shared sort of internal conflicts. And sometimes this goes along with having other conditions as well. So for me, particularly dyspraxia, I'm quite clumsy. I don't know my left from my right. So don't ever sit in a car with me and ask me to give you directions. However, the internal conflict can also come in with being ADHD and autistic, and all those things as well. So I just thought I'd put together some of the things that we talked about that we both said and agreed on, and I've heard from other people as well. So it's things like knowing not what needs to be done, but unable to break it down and how to start. Getting into hyperfocus and getting lots done, but sometimes to other people that looks like you're in the last minute, but sometimes that's the most productive time of the brain. Being really good in a crisis, you've got lots of processing ability at that point, but actually then every day where there isn't a crisis can seem really boring and it's difficult to kind of muster your energy together. ADHD is a great connectors. They can get really straight to the heart of something, asking people a really direct question sometimes because that's the heart of what's going on and what they need. But for some people, that can be interpreted as rude. And because of, I know that, the empathy I notice in ADHD friends is that, if they see somebody who's upset, they'll go straight to them and say, what's happened? And for some people, that seems a bit, direct. But it is generally out of care and empathy that happens. The other thing is admin is a minefield. We often do what's interesting first because that gets us going, but then other things can be left or forgotten, or we drop the balls. The plates that we've been spinning can get dropped. Forgetting simple things, it can be really frustrating and we can be very tough on ourselves. I've forgetting something that we should have done ages and weeks ago, and we feel really hard that we've let people down. And we need structure and sameness, but also at the same time that can feel boring and it's difficult to create it and sustain it. So people around us where we create systems that are always there and we know what's going on can be really helpful. And that's something that has made a huge difference in my own work as well. There's some more. Okay. We can often go off on tangents because the brain sees the big picture and sees things that other people don't see. We often have associations in our memory, and you say something and think, oh, that makes us think about that. And we go off on this big picture, which is fantastic for problem solving. And it may be a bit difficult to keep up with the picture. Sometimes you have to make us pause and explain where we're up to for you. And that can be helpful. But once we see that page, it's fantastic for problem solving. We may need some more time to process some things, but if we're impulsive, we might just say the first thing that comes into our head. And then either we try and cover that up by making it into a story, or again, we feel like, oh, we've messed up again. And some people are people pleasers, so yes to everything, but then get overloaded very easily with too many things to do. And sometimes it's easier to do the thing yourself than try and work with somebody else to do it who should be doing it. Does that make sense? Because I can't explain it in my head, so therefore, if I do it, I know it's done then. But then it's another job on top of the other things I should have been doing, and it's a distraction. So actually taking time to say, okay, how should I do this or how should we do this is really important as well. It can be difficult to create and keep boundaries, and in that way, I mean making time for your own rest, for example, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed and keep working. And often ADHDs are very sociable. They read everything in the room. But sometimes there's a social hangover. So it may be that you need to go and stand somewhere quiet on your own. And maybe like, Pete being the vicar, he might need to go and stand outside to talk to people because again, in a room full of people, that 360 sensory overload means that you're hearing all the conversations and focusing in on somebody who needs a one-to-one with you can be really difficult. So it may be that, Pete will, when you go see him off going somewhere quiet to talk to somebody, that's an important thing that he needs to do in order to do that. And again, the loving and the caring and the big empathy goes really deep for many people as well. Okay. The other thing is that we often know we need help, we want help, but it's very difficult sometimes to know what that help should be. And you say, well, how can I help you? I don't know, I just know I need help. I've often said that. So I'm going to show you something that might help work that out. Okay. So the first thing is to think about working with the ADHD, not against it. It's not going to go away. It's part of who Pete is. But if you work with it, you get the best out of what he can do. And one thing that can be really, really helpful is making things visible. Because executive functions is all and all these television screens and everything going on in the brain, bringing something onto a piece of paper. So a flip chart is a really good piece of kit to have in your office, for example, Pete. Or you could do it online if a notebook online. When you start mapping things out, like in a mind map, you can start to see all the different aspects of it, and you can see the links without having to hold that information in your head. And this is like a key part of what I do in my job. I'm continually making mind maps in order to understand a situation. But it also means that the person next to me who I'm working with can see it as well. There's another little strategy called a Kanban system, which is actually from Japan, but it's just really clear steps. This is what we're to do. This is what we're doing, and this is what we've done. And for an ADHDer to know what they've done and see that on a board or on a list somewhere or a tick when something's done is it fuels that dopamine. There's a satisfaction because they don't always remember what's been done. You're still like, oh, what have I done that thing? But if there's a clear list and that's been ticked off, it's very easy to find it. Be very clear and direct about what you want, how you're going to do it, what you need from Pete as part of that, and check that he's understood that. And again, it's not that he doesn't understand, but that verbalizing back to you will help him process that. Just to remember, don't assume. If you can externalize what you would perhaps normally hold internally and that assumption yourself, just explain it to Pete anyway. He won't be insulted. He'll be grateful for you doing that. And they're just small shifts that make a big difference. And show you how that works. This is what I do all the time is I do visual mapping. I do it with my team. I do it like last week I had one of my team who was having a bit of a problem. So we sat down, we got the big piece of paper out, well, say what the problem is. Why is it a difficulty? What are the factors involved? What do other people think about it? Where do we need to go with this? And what are the possible solutions? And this is the benefit of those things. Everybody feels listened to. Again, that's really important. Writing it down reduces that cognitive load and reduces the chance of misinterpretation. It can be shared easily. You can photocopy this, take a photograph, people can take it away with them. It's easier to see all the aspects. And again, you can see I've used color code in there. We can ask questions because, oh, I've not covered that or I'm not sure about that. It's easier to see it than actually to remember it. And it just leads to lots better problem solving and planning. So it's one thing that, I always encourage people to adopt this way of communicating. And as it becomes habit, you'll see the impact on things getting done, that, lot less misinterpretation or people not knowing things. It's a really good thing to bring into your meetings and planning. Okay. So, gosh, hasn't the time gone quick? I will leave some time for these questions. But just to bring this together, you're on a shared journey together, and at the heart of all that is your discipleship around Jesus, isn't it? As you come together as a community, being the church, being the light in the darkness of your community, you're on this shared journey together. So you're learning together, which is just a beautiful thing. You'll grow in understanding together. Pete's still learning about himself. You're supporting his calling, but also at the same time, you are supporting your own calling. As part of that, you're all important in this, and you're being curious and not critical. And don't underestimate how important that is and how wonderful it is, within your community. And just to, the body of Christ needs every part, you all working together. It's not a one-off thing, this thing in the afternoon. We've had this lovely, well, I've enjoyed talking to you. It'll be much nicer in a room, wouldn't it? We could have more interaction, but Lancashire's a long way away. But this is how we walk together, isn't it? We start this journey, we take that first step, and we keep learning as we go along. And we've all got a lot to learn. Okay. So just to kind of bring this bit to a close, it has been a lot of me trying to kind of put together enough for you. So I hope it has. But it is about grace, it's about community, it's about us getting out of that boat and walking on the water together towards Jesus, and just remembering that God says, His grace is all we need. His power is made strongest when we are weak. And as somebody with ADHD myself, this is one of my most, uh, parroted Bible verses. I say it all the time. I have it, ingrained and written up about me. It's We are weak in many different ways. There are weaknesses, there are strengths in all of us, but we want Christ's power to rest with us. And my prayer for you is that this is for all of you. And as I get to know Pete, for him in his role as well. Okay. There are some resources if you want to read more about it. I've just put a photograph there of some of the books on autism, ADHD, disability, and faith that I've kind of collected over the last couple of years. So great to see this as a growing area of theology. On my website, which is includedbygrace.co.uk, there's links to all these resources, which some of them are blogs. I've got one on my website, but there's also the Centre for Autism and Theology, which is also covering ADHD as well. So some great resources starting to grow in the Christian community around this. Okay, so there we go. Let's stop sharing. I'm quite proud of myself for time, actually. Did all right there.
Really good. Brilliant.
Oh, so we've got a few verbal processes in your group. That's good. Has anybody got any particular questions or comments? Katie?
Um, it's sort of something that's been sort of thrown around that caffeine is really good for calming people with ADHD down. Are you able to explain that to me? Because it's a baffle to me and to the doctor I work with, and we'd love to know.
It's interesting. Caffeine works differently with different ADHDers. Some it can be a stimulant. So the medication that goes on, we haven't talked about medication, but the medication, the amphetamine-based medication for ADHD, works differently in an ADHD brain than it does in a typical brain. So it's the stimulation is the stimulant of the dopamines to bring them to a typical level. So a typical person with an amphetamine would go on a high, but for an ADHD, it actually brings them up to that level. Now, there are other things that can mimic dopamine, and one of them is caffeine. One of them is there's adrenaline. So you get some ADHDers or adrenaline junkies, but there's also other things like self-medicating things like drugs and addictions, because each of those, even things like shopping addictions, are quite common in ADHD because, again, they're fueling that dopamine. And this is why, medication in and caffeine actually calms people because it actually just brings their brain working level up to a calmer state. Does that make sense, Katie?
Um, it's just trying to imagine how I would say that back to you. Because when you say bringing up to a calmer state, it sort of seems to be tautology, down to a calmer state.
It's a weird thing, isn't it? Because we're bringing the stimulation level up, but when we do, it means the brain can be calmer. When the stimulation level's down, the brain is like seeking out more and so gets more agitated because it's seeking out that level of balance. Does that make sense? Have you got something to say, Pete, about that?
Well, yes, I mean, it's also helpful and spot on. I mean, caffeine's one of the things I've learned about myself. Like I have 2 or 3 cups a day. I have to hold off in the morning from having one too early because I've then used up. I can't overdo it with caffeine. So I think and I talk to other people, perhaps neurospicy people, for whom it's different. But I know for myself, whatever is going on here, it's at sort of 9:30, 10ish. Um, on a bad day, maybe a bit earlier than that. But like because I go out on a morning walk or a bike ride, that's a really key. Um, a bit of a cold shower is another way of it's horrific, but it does do some of the dopamine stuff. Um, my non stimulant. Well, I do my kind of language app. That's another. There's a dopamine, or some of the word plays, puzzles, things that I do. But yeah, the caffeine, I'll have sort of just 2 or 3, and it will. I don't know. Maybe is it the kind of scatteredness, which is then by virtue of the caffeine, less scattered and more able to just kind of enable me to attend to the task at hand, something like I don't know quite what's going on, but I suppose
I know.
it's one of many areas where
Yeah.
I've kind of worked out what works. I don't necessarily know the reason behind it.
Yeah. And again, there's not enough research because it works. So for a long time, caffeine just made me fizz and overstimulated. But as I've got a bit older and and again in women it's different obviously for men, but women perimenopause, there's a lot of women in the late 40s, early 50s that are being diagnosed because perimenopause kind of takes the estrogen levels going low actually have a real impact on your ability to mask. They take away kind of all that energy and yeah, there's lots of interesting research around that. But before perimenopause, caffeine just used to make me go, ugh, and I couldn't have it. But now I'm finding it like, I had a cup of coffee just before we came here and I'm on it. Whereas I was feeling quite tired before, but then it kind of restored my energy. So it's interesting because every ADHD, it's a really good question, Katie. I'm going to go away and find some more research on this because I like to know. But it's so interesting how things like that work differently in an ADHD brain, and that kind of proves to us it's not just people, misbehaving. There's something neurologically going on. Yeah, good one. Thank you. Has anybody else got a question?
I don't know if it's a question as such, and I found that really, really helpful and loads to take in. So I look forward to receiving the slides and digesting it again later. I think my question, I suppose, it's more of a thought process really. Why has there been so much focus on autism and ADHD almost not like an afterthought kind of thing? I mean, sort of, I work within family hubs, so we have a lot of children coming through that are waiting diagnosis and things, and 90% of the children that are coming through are waiting for an autism diagnosis. And I think, yeah, so I found this has been really helpful because there's quite a lot of information now about autism, but I think still quite little about ADHD. So that's
Yeah,
more of a
I was saying
comment, an observation.
I've worked in the area of autism for 20 years and I've seen the growth in that, particularly
Mm,
once we started understanding around autism in girls and around masking.
mm,
And I just think ADHD is 5 to 10 years behind, but
yeah.
it's starting that process now. And all that I've, been able to explain to you today is really new because we also always thought ADHD was behavior and it was all about naughty
Mm,
children, usually boys. And they end up with children, in social, emotional, mental health, it used to be behavior difficulties, didn't it, in schools and things
mm,
like that. But now we're understanding the neurology of ADHD. It's really starting to flip things over. So I'm hoping we only go forward from that. And you're right.
yeah.
And what's interesting, Tamara, in many areas now, they're doing a dual diagnostic pathway. So
Mm,
they're starting here in Lancashire. I mean, it's a bit rocky and a bit, yeah, you know what it's like, lack of funding and all that. But instead of sending children on the autism or the ADHD pathway, they're
mhm,
now creating a neurodivergence
okay.
pathway. Again, because we're getting
Yeah,
to know more. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops in the next few years,
yeah,
really.
definitely. Thank you.
Just a little bit on that, just to touch on, but great to have other questions if people have got them. My ADHD diagnosis said, "Oh, it just slipped in there, like, but we, it would be a good idea to, we recommend getting assessed for autism. And I just thought, oh, they'd just like me to pay some more money or have them do another assessment, and it's just a monetary thing. And I kind of consigned it to that. My mum talked about before, I think, with some of you, would have been diagnosed, or well, was never diagnosed. It would have been like Asperger's sort of thing. And Lynn's talking about genetics and so forth. And the more I think about it, and again, what Lynn said about labels is helpful. There's sort of limited usefulness, but like that kind of autism, and whether one goes down that track or that track. But yeah, I think, and it's just sort of over the last 2 years with more dedicated kind of help and support, coaching, counselling, and understanding about myself in a new way in or just about late 40s in how I've operated and what kind of makes me me. The ADHD side is somewhat better understood, but I'm still loads more to learn. But I think what that then is having a thinker grasp that there is at least autistic traits, but probably there's autism in the mix. And part of my head often goes to like, I think actually there's so much overlap. Lynn is sort of possibly hinting at that is one really fully extractable from the other. And just the other quick thing, sorry, but hyperactivity. I don't sit down that often. That's a bit of a clue, but most of my hyperactivity is in here. So I didn't score for the assessment as a hyper. I'm not combined type. I'm just the inattentive type. But I really quite strongly feel like that for ADHDers there is well, my feeling is there's always hyperactivity. It's just whether it's manifesting. I'm not perhaps as much twiddling or fiddling or that kind of moving, but it's inside. That's my little scattered thoughts.
There is a new phrase that they're saying is ADHD, where the autism and ADHD is combined. And when I work with people who have, aspects of both, what we do is just explore the characteristics which are, and I kind of look at it as what are the primary characteristics, what are the secondary things. So for me, ADHD is the primary thing, my dyspraxia is secondary, but they both interact with each other and so on as well. So I have a daughter, as I said, who's more autistic, but ADHD characteristics. So it's really about getting to know the individual, isn't it? And as you say, if you work with families tomorrow, there's that understanding of, building the executive functions, I think, cover both. And one of the things that is really important is helping young people learn, or the parents as well, learn how to teach tasks. So we often think that people are going to just pick them up, but actually a lot of things need teaching in a very, kind of productive, structured way.
Yeah.
Katie.
May I make another comment? I think that it should be just natural part of assessment. You know how when we have our babies, they get their hearing checked, their vision checked, but it waits until there's a problem that's identified before there's any help to screen for dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. And by that point, the people have struggled with all those things that you just mentioned because it's not adapted to their ability to learn in that way. And then we end up with the emotional and depression, all those kind of problems because they've struggled and fought for so long. I mean, you just say dyspraxia and I think, oh yes, Calamity Jane, that was me. That was my label, always dropping things, always, ransacking the place by accident. Oops. And teased about that right up until, my dad died. He was still, every time I saw him, it would be some kind of mocking me for being clumsy or, oh, there's Katie, whoops. It would be far more understanding to have that kind of that's a problem, that's a difficulty that she faces. It's not just her being stupid, and that would come about through assessment right at the beginning, rather than just laughing and oh goodness, can you just shut up, can you just sit down, can you anything, just get out of my hair.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel for you, I do. I mean, when I grew up, we were kind of feral, I think. You know, a lot of our hyperactivity, because I've got three siblings and we are all ADHD, but we were just played out a lot. You know, we climbed trees and we problem solved and we were out and you said, come home at tea time. And that was all our hyperactivity and our, you know, our needs for movement were catered for in that one. We didn't have massive homework like children did. We weren't sat in on screens, you know, and all those things are having an impact on our children's attention. And I think, you know, there is all these pressures on families as well. Just to say, there is I think they are active in your area. There's an organization called Growing Hope, that has again a Christian thing, organization, run by Naomi Jacobs, who is really good at, again, if you've got your children's work, your family's work, you know, connecting with those would be really, really good place to connect. Even, you know, looking at their resources would be really good. Through the Roof is really, again, Pete knows them, a really good organisation, again, for resources. You can formalise this in having roof breakers in your church, which is a really good kind of role to have. And it's somebody who advocates, and somebody can, and other people can go to them just as a friendly thing. You know, if you want to look at making a certain service or an event more friendly for different needs, then it's somebody who can just give advice on that. Don't put all the work on them, but you know, they're advisory and somebody who, you know, reaches out and learns about these things. There's a great community now. And again, over 20 years, I've seen this grow. The amount of people now within the UK and beyond who are so much more aware, who are, I mean, my whole website is putting together all the resources that I found throughout the country together where you can find them. I create my own resources. And it's just, I just love to see this growing within the UK, because when I started, there was nothing, you know, and just to see what churches want to do. Because really, Katie kind of and Tamara, you both hinted at this, for families and for people growing up into adulthood who have these conditions, are there's a lot going against them. You know, there's a lot of dismissal, there's a lot of persecution, there's a lot of being told they're failures, and struggles, mental health difficulties. So we should be thinking about our churches as sanctuaries. You know, we don't have to put the pressure on them that there is in schools or in the workplace or whatever, and creating a space within church that is open to all. And my own church, we've been going on this as a journey ourselves. And I look around on a Sunday morning. We're a Church of England church. We meet though in a community hall, and because we're on a new estate. And there's somebody crocheting in one corner. There's an area where there's tables and the youth are sat around it. There's mats on the floor and kids are playing on that. We have sensory bags, you know, and when we sing, people don't have to stand up, you know. We've starting to create a culture where we're getting more and more different people who are more open about their needs. You know, somebody who's deaf, somebody who is physically disabled. We've got people who are neurodivergent, somebody sitting there with headphones on. And it's just because we are all learning together and not putting pressure on people. So I just think churches have a real opportunity to be sanctuaries in this world that is so hard. And I see so many kids with mental health difficulties and adults too, where their needs haven't been met. So, you know, that's my kind of, yeah, passion really, to try and help us make churches great communities where they feel safe and accepted and able to grow and thrive. There you go.
Bless you. And the fact that we've got this, and I mean, I'm sort of just about holding it in, but like the support and that kind of desire to learn together, and there is that journey that we're all on, and that's my vision as well, that our church is seen to be and is proactively somewhere that people, you know, with difficulties, challenges, you know, probably some of the things we've touched on where they're not fitting into a typical, you know, some of the challenges that they faced, you know, make it difficult for them to access. But I want us to be that accessible and welcoming place.
Just a warning, it'll be messy.
Surely.
If people are open and honest, it'll be messy because we're people. But honestly, you're all lovely, and I just have really been honoured to meet you all and be part of this. And do keep in touch. I'd love to know how you're all getting on.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate all you've put in. We look forward to getting the slides through and the recording. A few people have messaged saying that they haven't been able to access that, but I said to people beforehand, we'll send that round. Could you pray for us in our journey, Lynn, and we'll
Yes,
then
I'd love to.
go our separate ways. Thanks so much.
Heavenly Father, thank you for these people here and those who are going to listen to this recording. Thank you, Lord, that their hearts are open to what you might be wanting to teach them, and that they're coming together as a community to be more, to want to be more welcoming, to more supportive, more understanding. And I know, Lord, that your grace is sufficient for them, that your power is made perfect in all their weaknesses, and that you just love people reaching out to you and say, how can we be more welcoming? How can we show your grace in our community? I pray for them, for a blessing upon them, and that you'll help them work through this in the most productive ways and the most helpful ways that will help them work forward. Thank you, Lord, that you are Lord. Thank you as Easter comes. We are remembering your death, but your resurrection and the great joy that brings into the world. Help us all be lights in the darkness of this world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Then.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
very
Lynn.
much, Lynn.